Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and watching this nice casual panel discussion that we're going to have. I want to start off by introducing our two interviewees. First, we have Mr. Rick Hart, who's currently a junior political science and sociology major at Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. Rick interned for the mayor of Baltimore, Maryland during his senior year of high school. He joined the Biden campaign in October of 2019 as a volunteer and was hired in a paid fellowship capacity later that winter. Soon enough, he found himself assisting in the coordination of student outreach efforts for the Biden campaign on the ground during both the Iowa caucus and the South Carolina primary. Beginning in July through his fellowship capacity, Rick began to serve as the lead coordinator of student and youth outreach, which means 18 to 35-year-olds, in Georgia through the Biden campaign's coalition department. He reported directly to Biden headquarters in Philadelphia and was part of the field team that worked to flip Georgia blue on presidential levels since 1992. This past summer, Rick interned at the Federal Reserve Board of Governors in the Office of Continuity Programs, working to assist in interagency crisis management in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. As president of the Morehouse College chapter of National Action Network, he was also a featured speaker during the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington at the Lincoln Memorial in August. Rick now serves as Young Georgians Engagement Director of Reverend Raphael Warnock and has recently begun serving as the HBCU Outreach Director of College Democrats of America. And also today we have Naja Mix, and who since joining the Impact Strategies team in 2018, Naja has led the internal teams assisted in providing strategic relationships for clients and community partners and amplified key campaigns and messaging. And in 2019, Naja became the chief of staff for Angela Rye Incorporated and Impact Strategies. Naja continues the work of others before her in community activism and political involvement with the Impact Strategies team. Naja is a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and she also enjoys Wind Down Wednesdays, her monthly gathering, which is now virtual, for people to relate, release, connect, relax, and refill themselves. She loves to dance and explore new experiences, and Naja currently resides in Los Angeles, California. So as you all can see that our two interviewees today are very much qualified in the areas of social activism and voting and just the political process in general. So you all are in for a treat, and I am very much excited to dive into this conversation and hear what type of tidbits and advice and wisdom they have as we go into this critical election season for our Georgians, the Senate runoff race that starts on January 5th. So I can't wait to get into it. And off the bat, let's just dive right in. We really want to make sure that we are addressing this specifically to our young voters, to everyone in general, but we want to make sure that our young voters, their voices are being heard. So right off the bat, our first question is, we know that the younger generations are very much in tune with social media. What advice do you have on how to use this tool of social media to advance the cause of justice or civic engagement? And Rick, let's start with you.
Sure. Thank you, BJ. Thank you for having me. And Joy, thank you for inviting me to serve on this panel, sit on this panel this evening and speak to everybody. So in terms of social media, never have we been in an environment in which information can spread as rapidly as it can today. And you can use social media both for good and bad. And in this environment, we have to ensure that people 18 to 35, younger and older, are using social media to promote positive images of lasting societal change. One thing that I was going to say, probably later down the line, but I'll say it now, is that we young people are not only the leaders of tomorrow, but also the leaders of today. And in that, we hold a responsibility to do everything we can to ensure that everybody is aware of what's on the ballot, to ensure that voters, there's just a general sense of voter awareness, to make sure that people know voter registration deadlines, when's the last day you can turn in, submit your absentee ballot, when your polling locations are open. We need to use tools such as social media for the good to ensure that people have the information and the resources necessary to vote for the best possible candidates on the ballot.
Absolutely. Naja, do you want to butt in there?
he's a hard act to follow, so I won't say too much. But thank you, BJ, for starting this organization and getting this together. Thank you, Joy, for having all of us here. I know you've worked hard to pull this together. Thank you to the 6th District, and thank you to the supervisor as well for allowing us to do this in her absence. I'm not going to say too much because, like I said, Mr. Rick Hart pretty much got everything there. But I will just say another thing that I'll just add, in addition to what he said, is that people are always watching and they're learning from what you're posting. And so a lot of times you may see something that you didn't know, and I think it's important to use social media and the social media platforms to educate and engage other people like yourselves and not like yourselves, because it's important to reach people where they are, and social media has given us that tool. And that's all that I'll add there.
Absolutely. Awesome answers. Still on this topic of the youth vote, especially in terms of this election in January. Let's talk about what role or responsibility do you think that young people have in this upcoming election?
Does it matter?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but feel free to piggyback on whatever
Definitely,
I say, Rick.
definitely.
I just think it's important to recognize that historically the youth have always pretty much determined the vote. They've always been involved and they've always been engaged. A lot of times we try to make it seem like it's a new thing, but it's not if you just look at a history book. I think it's also important to acknowledge what Rick said, is that we're not only talking about the future, but we are the leaders of right now. This is pretty much our world. You know, we'll be living in it longer than anyone else. So it's important that we take care of it. It's important that we guide our generation, as well as the ones before us and the ones after us, along the right path. And to that point, I always talk about legacy. Like Nipsey Hussle says, the marathon continues. I always say that the legacy continues. So when we're talking about voting and we're talking about what's on the ballot and what's important to us in our communities, it's also important to acknowledge what is important to our communities for a long period of time, for our legacy, for the people who are coming behind us. Because just like our ancestors left the world a better place for us, it is our responsibility to do the same thing for everyone else. So that's why I think that it's important for you to do that, because people are looking to us, as they always have, to guide them along the right path. And I'll leave it to you, Rick.
Yeah, I agree 100% with what Naja stated. You know, we kind of tying into that idea of where the leaders of today and tomorrow, we have to stand up today and continue to do that in the days going forward. And I'm a big elections data person. I like looking at numbers and finding out, you know, how much this candidate won by in this precinct, in that county, or, you know, statewide, things like that. Georgia, for example, was won by a little over 12,000 votes. There are some high school football stadiums, probably in the state of Georgia, state of Texas, Alabama, that are bigger than that. You had millions of people that casted ballots here, and President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris won the state by 12,000 votes. So in order for us to, you know, continue to push for progress, to continue to advocate for some change in how we are governed, you know, in the leaders that we elect, we have to match that level of youth turnout, if not exceed it, on January 5th. And that's up to us. We control what happens in this runoff race because of how sheer, you know, how small the margins are in this race and going forward.
Absolutely. And I love, Rick, how you talked about this idea of small margins. I think that's really important to bring up that thing about numbers and bring up how small the margins are, is because when you're trying to convince somebody that their vote matters, really, that's why I like to say too, you have to look at the numbers. So moving on, when we talk about this thing of small margins, what else would you say to younger people that they don't think that one vote would matter, that they say they're just going to sit this election out because they're just not interested?
Yeah, kind of what you were just stating, BJ. That 12,000 vote margin is 0.20% That's nothing. It goes to show you that every single vote really does matter. Not only are there the 2 Senate runoff races on the ballot, but we also have a race for public commissioner in which you have a Daniel Blackman running against Bubba McDonald, who served on the commission for a very long time. And we're talking about a position that works to determine what our electricity bill looks like. I believe that Georgia has the 5th highest rate of electricity bills per capita in the United States in terms of states, when you put all the states in line. And we have an opportunity to change that in this runoff race. Again, that's Daniel Blackman running against Bubba McDonald. Daniel Blackman's a Democrat. Bubba McDonald is a Republican in that race. In the Senate race, another race that'll be determined by likely less than 1 percentage point. We're talking about the balance of the United States Senate on the line. Whether or not, the incoming president-elect and vice president-elect will be able to govern effectively, to be very blunt about it, or whether or not there are going to be significant roadblocks in the way for them to pass the legislative agenda that they promised on their path to election. So that's Georgia that will determine that. And that percentage point or so that will sway this election goes to show you that the country, in essence, is going to revolve around what takes place here in 9 days. And we have to be very mindful of that and make sure everybody goes to vote.
Yeah, and I would just add to that point, I think it's important when people, what I've learned from this idea of community activism and political activism, when people are saying that their vote doesn't matter, it's because they feel like they haven't been heard. So it's important when you're talking to young people or anyone and you just listen to their concerns. If you care about them, you address them one by one. So if someone is talking about they don't care about them because of their education and access, there's people on the ballot that actually do care about that. And if you vote for them, they will show you. A lot of times working at Impact Strategies and with my boss, we talk about how if you had someone work for you and they weren't doing their job, you would say, hey, hello, are you going to do your job or not? The politicians work for you. We're taxpayers. We pay their bills. So it's important when they're not doing their job, or if you feel like someone can do it better, you vote for the right person and then you hold them accountable throughout their entire term. So that's what I would say to someone who says that their vote doesn't matter, because it does. And you know that, BJ, because this is all about your voice is your vote.
Right, absolutely. I love that. If you want to be involved, not only vote, but also hold these policymakers accountable. So I love that tidbit. So onto this idea of voter turnout. We know that people voting is important, but any suggestions on how young people or what young people can do to increase voter turnout as a whole?
Yeah, tell everybody you know. It sounds very simple, but when you go, let's say you go to your 2 next door neighbors, then you go to your grandmother, your aunt, your uncle. I got a lot of uncles that haven't voted. The probably last time they voted was for President Obama in 2008. People, that typically are not going to turn out in a runoff election, making sure that they're aware that they have until January 5th to cast their ballot is incredibly important. Again, word of mouth is the oldest way in which information has been spread. And if you tell everybody in your network, everybody in your orbit to tell another 3 people to go out and vote, that's how we create the turnout. That's how we craft the turnout that elected Joe Biden in Georgia, that won Joe Biden in the state of Georgia. And that's how we can ensure that we elect, some great Senate candidates here on the ground come January 5th.
I forgot the question, BJ.
So it was what can young people do to increase voter turnout?
Yeah. Like Rick said, you have to tell everyone you know. And going back to the first question on social media is so important. It's how we pretty much find out all of our information. So like I was saying earlier, it's so important that you post, where to vote. People actually don't know what you think that they know. So it's also very important to send them the times that the polls are open. Send them what poll they can go to. If they don't have access to transportation, there are several organizations now that are providing that access. If we were not in a global pandemic, I would tell you to go pick up someone, but because I care about your life, I don't suggest that unless you wear a mask. However, it's also very important to do those things as well, because education, like Joy said earlier, is the first tool to making sure that people know what's happening.
Can I add on just one thing to Naja's point? Yeah. So again, in this day and age in which information just spreads incredibly rapidly, there's so much disinformation, misinformation floating about. I think that we're seeing an unprecedented amount of just false things being said, whether it be online or by, on television ads, twisting words, and, the imagery of this person is tarnished because of advertisements. And, it's crazy. We've never seen anything like this. And it's just critically important. I'll just tell a quick story. There was somebody I was talking to the other day that thought that Ossoff and Warnock were running against each other because there's just so much flying around. So many people are saying so many different things, and it's back to Naja's point. A lot of people don't know as much as you think they do. So just harping in, ensure that you're sharing information, but sharing the correct information is incredibly important.
Yeah. Absolutely, I think that's really important. Thank you for that addition. So still on this topic of increasing voter turnout, so in the state of Alabama, there's this thing about many polling sites being closed, and in Georgia, people stood in line for hours to vote on multiple elections. And in many states, people go to the polls to vote and find their names removed from the polling list. So what can we do to make voting easier? What do people need to do to make sure that their names have not been removed and that their polling site has not changed? Or in other words, what can voters do to make sure that they're prepared come election day?
I will say one thing, and then anyone else can join in. Actually, for the 2020 general election, just in November, I came back home to Atlanta to vote. And as I was looking up online, they said that I was not registered. And I'm a person that's very political, like aware of everything. So I was very nervous. I kind of started looking up what should I do. So the first person I found was Kristen Clark. She's the executive director of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law. They have a number on their website. If you have any problems, they could call you. The second thing I would say is I told my parents, a lot of us are younger, so prayerfully we have that access. And my mom gave me my voter registration card and told me that I was okay. And so when I went to the polls, I pulled that out and everything was okay. So sometimes, like Rick was saying, that you might find some misinformation or something might happen and you might freak out. I would say, number one, take a step back, breathe, talk to God. Number two, pull out your voter registration card. If you don't have one, I think that it's very important to request one. I know that seems a little old-fashioned, I understand, but especially now when Black lives are actually on the ballot, it is important to have all of the tools that we need to be successful. And I believe that that's one tool. And then the third thing, what number am I on? The third thing I would say is to look up organizations or committees that are there to help you, because they're there. And I will just repeat this again, because this is the one that I use, and I would suggest this to anyone. It's the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law, and the executive director is Kristen Clark. So if you don't get that, look up Kristen Clark, and they will definitely go to bat for you and help you figure out whatever it is that you need.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay. for me, always this is remembered in my head is mvp.sos.ga.gov. What you can do there, you enter your information, your address, your full name, you look up to see whether or not you're registered. And if you're not, I had an issue as well. It said I voted in 2018, but for some reason going into 2020, my status was pending, which was just weird. So, I was able to go to the voter registration link through the Secretary of State's office and call Fulton County Board of Elections to ensure that I was on the voter roll. So just making sure up until, if you got to check right before you head to the polls, go check the Secretary of State's website to ensure that you're in their system. And if not, use that website again, mvp.sos.ga.gov. Go there, and if not, find your county and call your Board of Elections. Call your Board of Elections to ensure that you have the right to vote, because it's too important that last second people are realizing that they can't vote. Just in Cobb County, within this past week, actually, the Republican Party in Cobb County put together a lawsuit to throw off 16,000 people off the voter registration rolls here in Georgia. And it was rejected instantly by the Board of Elections. But still, we're seeing last second attacks on people's inherent right to vote in 2020, which is just crazy. We've been fighting for this for so long, and we have to continue that fight. So again, just go and check the Secretary of State's website. If you got to get on the phone, do it. It's too much is on the line to not be able to vote in this election.
Agreed. Very well said. Yeah, something I always say is voting is too important, just like you just said, Rick. And when you approach election day, that's not something you want to be unprepared for. You want to just be a little bit more proactive than you would usually be in your day to day and check your status and make sure that everything is everything before you get to your polling site. Awesome, awesome, awesome tidbits. So moving on, let's approach this idea of volunteerism in the community in terms of political process and also in terms of social action and social justice. So, whoever wants to jump in first, but what would you say to young people that may be too young to vote, but still want to make a difference in the area of social justice? How can they become involved in the election process?
You can
Yeah.
go first.
Okay. I would say volunteering is one of the most important and critical, like crucial, in terms of changing the landscape of how elections work, is one of the most crucial actions that you can take. They always talk about a close race, a race that is won by less than 3% of the percentage points is always called a field race. And field races are won based off of on the ground game. People going door to door, people making phone calls, people sign waving at visibility events, people putting signs out in their community. That's how races such as this one are going to be won. And as long, again, I'm speaking on behalf of the We're Not campaign here, as long as we're able to turn out the best ground game as opposed to Senators Perdue and Loeffler, we think we have a great shot at winning here if we have a better ground game than they do when it's said and done. So volunteering, again, is one of the most important things that you can do, especially if you're underage and you're not able to register to vote.
Just adding to that, I think it's important to understand that voting is just one part of the political process. It is a very big part, it's huge, but it's only one part. I think a lot of us, I know this is the next question, get involved with the political process and politics and community activism before we're 18. And I think the ways in which we do are different for everyone. But for me, I would say for someone 17 and younger, choose an issue that's important to you. So for example, March for Our Lives, the gun control in Florida. None of those children were 18, but we listened to them, we heard them, they had a cause, and they made their cause known. Whether some people agree with it or not, we know what it is. And so when you're talking about getting involved, when you're talking about volunteering, volunteer and get involved with things that you are most passionate about, because that's where you will make the most difference. Yes.
If I can intrude in this conversation, because I think it's very relevant, especially for the folks participating on this call. The AME Church, which, as we all know, is started with a liberation theology, is really built on a system that encourages participation from the earliest age, as early as 5, 6, 7. And I think that sort of builds a real regard for civic engagement. I think that where all campaigns get it wrong, really is not to put the investment into the community on a year-round basis. If you do that, and I think what was brilliant about Stacey Abrams' campaign, for example, was to really engage those folks who were the most disengaged, especially around our rural communities and rural counties. I love what you said about the number and the mass of misinformation that's going around. I remember a report from 20 years ago that most people spend about 5 minutes, if that, a day thinking about anything political, because they're living their ordinary lives. And so for the AME Church to be so civically minded in terms of participation within the church, I think it fosters a curiosity about those public policy issues that we should all care about. I know that our young people are the ones that wave the flag around issues like climate, student loan. I mean, we've been talking about student loans now for decades. But it was really the young people like the ones on this call that were really waving the flag and being the real vanguards concerning an issue that impacts their ability to live their lives. So it's the real, I call them kitchen table issues, but they're real time kitchen table issues. Black Lives Matter really as an instrument of civic engagement, it began with young people's voices. With all due respect to sort of the old heads of the civil rights movement, they were exhausted. And so we needed the intellectual prowess and, frankly, the soldiering of the Black Lives Matter to belong to young people. So I think in terms of that engagement, it's not about the politics of the moment. It's about the politics that really belong in our everyday lives.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that addition. I do agree that that's very relevant to us in this discussion, but also to everyone that is watching. So thank you so much. Continuing on, just making this aspect or this topic of volunteerism more personal to the both of you, what motivated you to become involved in social activism and the political process as a whole? In other words, how did you become involved?
Oh, yep, you got it.
So, oh, I'm sorry, Rick. I didn't want to cut you off.
Okay. No, you were perfectly fine.
Okay, I was trying to unmute, so I'm sorry for going so slow. Actually, to the supervisor's point, I grew up AME, and so I think being in the church and being aware and understanding that although we may think that politics has nothing to do with us, it has everything to do with who we are. So growing up in the church, seeing my grandfather and seeing different historical figures interact and trying to understand what that means or what that looks like for me as a young Black woman was my first little taste of it. My mother has always talked about being involved in your community and how your community has everything to do with like yourself, but also your legacy, going back to the point that I was talking about earlier. And so it's kind of this thing where I saw like the community and the politics and the activism. So I saw community political activism all coming into one, and I wanted that. I wanted to be a part of that. And so that's a lot from the AME Church, and that's a lot from just who my family is as who they are. And then when I was able to vote, that's when Barack Obama was on the ballot, and I wanted to vote for the first Black male president, or because there's going to be a female soon, so that's correct on male. And ever since then, it's just been something that I have consumed my life with, but not in a bad way, just something that, I care about myself, I care about my family, I care about my community. And the way that I can best help all of those things is through politics, through policy making, and through helping policymakers. And so that's where that came for me. And I'm sure that some of us might have the same story. So, yeah. Rick, what's your story?
It's very similar. Also, I grew up as a member of the AME Church as well. I remember like my grandmother waking me up at 7 a.m. on a Sunday being like, let's go, we're going to church. I'd be like, no, like we do this every weekend, not really understanding. But one thing I'll add, before elaborating further, is that once I got a little bit older, I was able to finally understand why she did that. Understanding the sense of community around you, in which you're loved, in which you can work together to create real solutions, real change within your church community. Seeing that as I got older, I understood why my grandmother woke me up that early. And then growing up in that early on Sundays, and then growing up in the DC area as well, politics is just flowing around you 24/7. One event that sticks out to me was watching through gates, watching the groundbreaking of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. I think it was 2007 or 2006 or 2007, like watching that and not really being able to understand the significance of the moment, but knowing something extremely powerful was taking place in downtown DC. That's one event. And then my grandmother taking me to knock on doors as an 8-year-old for President Obama. Again, not being able to fully grasp the situation, contextualize it. But knowing, seeing my dad cry for the first time, you know, the night that President Obama won, you're like, something big is happening. And then you get a little bit older, and I was like, I just want to continue to help in any way I can. You know, I volunteered, started working in the field, now I'm helping coordinate youth vote on one of the most important Senate races that our nation has ever seen. So it's been an incredible journey. I'm incredibly blessed and grateful. And I just want to serve in whichever way I can.
Absolutely, absolutely. Awesome answers. Very inspiring to me, but I'm sure also to everyone that's watching. So thank you all for sharing your stories. So now we're going to shift into this idea and concept of social action and how all these social issues that are so pressing and that we see all the time through social media, but just in general, and how that ties into what's on the ballot and how important voting is. So these two interviewees are going to make that connection for you and hopefully get you motivated to vote early or vote on January 5th. So there are so many critical issues facing our country. What do you think are some of the important issues that are, quote, on the ballot? And Naja, you can start.
Okay, thank you. On the ballot to me is, you know, we talk about Black Lives Matter, but not even the hashtag, like actual Black lives are on the ballot. And I'm not talking about the candidates, I'm talking about us and our livelihood and going to the store and wearing a hoodie and wearing a mask and coming back home safely, going to the mall to see Christmas lights and coming back safely. That's on the ballot. Criminal justice reform, because the Black community knows too much, far too much about it. Then sometimes I feel like we have to. Affordable housing, because again, that touches not only myself, but my community and communities of color. Healthcare. If 2020 didn't teach us anything, COVID, Trump, health, we need healthcare. The amount of people dying every day, it's still jarring to me. And I think that a lot of us feel like it's kind of normal, but every time I turn on the news, I'm like, this is someone that someone else loves, and this could have been avoided. And we don't even have systems in place to help us, because now most of us are going to have, well, who have had COVID or haven't, are going to have a pre-existing condition. So what does that look like without affordable healthcare? Global warming, because again, I care about what I leave behind, and it's a thing. Climate change is a thing, and it might not be important to a lot of people, but it really is important of how we're going to be able to move within our daily lives. Now, I don't want to take up too much time, but the last thing I would say what's important on the ballot, because there's so many things, is education. We always talk about equality versus equity, and I think that, you know, you can't always put them against each other, but it is important to know that equity is what gives us the access to be kind of equal. And so when I'm talking about education, I'm talking about the fact that I'm a product of Atlanta Public Schools, and I loved my education, but I went to a school that was in a better community so that I could not have to pay, my parents didn't have to pay for me to go to private school. And so education is so important, and people don't always understand how education and voting for people have to go hand in hand, but they do. They're directly correlated. And so I don't remember the whole question, but I do know that you asked what was on the ballot. And to me, those are the most important things that are facing our community and communities of color.
Wow. Naja, you hit everything. But what stood out to me the most of what you just stated was the part about Black lives being on the ballot. When you said that, that was the first time I had ever heard anybody say it in that sense. And a chill went through me, because you're 100% correct. Our lives are quite literally on the ballot. Our voting rights are under attack day in and day out still. Equitable access to healthcare. Black and brown folks are dying at disproportionate rates due to the COVID-19 pandemic than any other ethnic group. We're seeing crumbling roads and bridges that affect Black and brown communities, people's commutes to work. The people have access to expanding MARTA, for example, here in the Atlanta area is a serious issue that often comes down to, it turns into a Black-white issue. We have not expanded MARTA in the greater Atlanta area. We're talking about climate change. Environmental justice is on the ballot. You have big power conglomerates and companies that have gotten away with ripping off people that look like us for decades, not having access to broadband, poor water quality in significant swaths of this state. All of that is on the ballot. Criminal justice reform is on the ballot. There's a generation of black men and women behind bars still to this day, because of tough on crime policies that were pushed into this nation's psyche during the 1980s and 90s. So there's so much that we are tasked to work on. That's why, again, that going back to one of the earlier questions, one of the first questions about everybody going to vote. What's the importance of one vote? One vote holds the ability to change the tide on this, right? Talking about that 12,000 vote number, 0.20%. If we all, again, tell everybody in our network to go vote, we can flip this state, keep this, again, I'm speaking on behalf of the War Not campaign, trying to be as nonpartisan as I can, but we can keep this state blue is my hope for the future. And we can enact some real significant progressive policies that will change the landscape of this nation for generations to come. That's my hope. And I really do believe that this presidential election and this runoff are the early catalysts of that longstanding movement.
Well said, both of you. Perfect. That's awesome. So our last and final question is that we often see things on social media and TV that are unfair or unjust, as you guys just perfectly touched on these issues that are quote unquote on the ballot. So instead of feeling hopeless, what can we do on a local and a national level? But more importantly, what role do these local elected officials play in securing justice? And Rick, you can go ahead and start on that one.
Right. I am a firm believer that local elections are more important, actually, than national elections. We have here in the Atlanta area, you have school boards that are determining whether kids are going to come back in person and wear masks or remain at home, socially distanced and at laptops or however they can log on to school virtually. We're talking about people that fill potholes. We're talking about snow removal in certain parts of the country in terms of local elections. Those folks determine what takes place in our day-to-day lives, how our municipalities, how our townships, how our counties function, and if they're efficient or not, if government's efficient or not on the local level. So we have probably the most important Senate runoff race in this nation's history, accompanied by a race for public service commissioners. That's a statewide race as well. But we can't forget the importance of voting in our local elections. Your county commissioner, your city council, your DA, all of those races matter significantly. Just touching on the DA point real quick. I know I'm kind of all over the place, but it was a DA in Louisville and an attorney general in Kentucky that failed Breonna Taylor. It was a DA out in Brunswick that had to be removed in order for us to start to work on getting justice for Ahmaud Arbery. Again, these are people that are elected in local capacities, and they do wield a lot of power, and our votes are the say. Those are our seats. Our votes determine how they act once they get there, and we have to continue to hold them accountable going forward.
Yes, Rick. And when you're ready to run for this local election, I'm going to vote for you, okay? Because I know it's coming. We're putting that in the atmosphere, okay?
Thank you.
But I would say he is absolutely right. I actually started my career at a mayor's office in Louisiana. She was the first Black mayor of Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And being a part of that process and just seeing how that actually changed the city is what motivated me to try to see, nationally and locally what that looks like. And I always come back to hashtag local elections matter. They're so important. You can touch them, you can feel them. They're right there. It has everything to do with your daily lives, what grocery store you go to, what groceries are available at that grocery store. And so local elections matter, all elections matter. That is a fact. But local elections are so much near and dear to our heart and our communities. And that's something that, again, we can call our local officials and be like, hey, you work for me. What are you doing? You came to my church on Sunday and said you were going to do this. Is that what you're doing? Because I don't want to see you the next time on Sunday. I want to talk to you today on a Tuesday. You know, that's what's happening, and that's what we need to do for our community.
Absolutely. Well said. That concludes all of my questions. Again, thank you all so much, Naja and Rick, for tuning in and having this very much needed discussion to revitalize our youth and our voters in general for this very, very, very critical Senate runoff election in January, but also elections after that as well. So thank you all. And we hope that all of you all watching feel energized and motivated to be engaged in the political process. And thank you again.